Are Google Ads exact match keywords dead now in 2024? Well, the short answer is no, they're not. But you're here for the long answer, so let's get right into it. You see, with the vast majority of our clients here at Cartlift, where we exclusively sell e-commerce products, the majority of our search campaigns run on broad match, and they're not only more scalable that way, but in many cases they're actually even more profitable just because Google has a lot more options. However, there are a few scenarios in which exact match still in 2024 with all machine learning and all auto bidding still makes a lot of sense. So I want to present to you now a few scenarios where you should actually consider using exact match rather than broad or possibly also phrase match so that you can maximize your results. Number one is you have a very specific product. And of course, there can be varying degrees of that. But basically, one of our most complicated clients in terms of what they sell was selling very complex workspace computers for universities and other institutions. And they could be like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, right? So here it was extremely important what customers were typing in, not only because the CPCs were sky high, but also because the product was so complex and technical. Or, for example, take a company that we're talking to right now. They are most likely becoming a client, and they are selling water desalination machines, right? Crazily expensive stuff, and there is no way that's, unless you're searching for something remotely related to it, you will ever convert on a high 5-figure or even many 6-figure machine that is not meant, of course, to be sold to end consumers, for example. But it doesn't have to be as ultra specific as that. We had HVAC parts that still you wanted to describe in a fairly specific way, right? We had specific type of working gear, for example. But also if, let's say, you are selling cosmetics and yours have a very specific feature or a very specific ingredient that people want to or should look for, because otherwise they are sort of disqualifying themselves, then it can be useful to use exact match or at least phrase match. Because the thing is, what many people don't understand about how the algorithm works is if you use broad match for these type of things, Google needs to understand what your ideal customer looks like. And if you have a very expensive item that you just sell a few times per month or per week, or if it's so specific that Google isn't able to build a data set that's large enough, then it won't really learn. And then broad match cannot really play at its full strength. And that's why you will always be at a disadvantage compared to phrase or especially exact match, where you do more manual work, but because you have an information advantage in this very specific niche or industry. Whereas the vast majority of the time, Google is better than you doing it if you have a somewhat mass market product, if that makes sense. The second use case for exact match is if you are on a very low budget. If you can only spend $1,000 or $2,000 per month on Google anyway for the time being because you are just getting started or something, why not spend that money on the lowest hanging fruits anyway, right? So instead of having a search campaign with 8 ad groups and 20 keywords each, all broad match, that will require endless testing and lots of negative keyword research before you get some good results, why not immediately start with exact match, knowing that you won't be able to exhaust all the available volume anyway, right? So as I said, one of the key reasons you want to use broad match is for scaling, even though with enough conversions, typically it also gets more profitable. But scaling is, of course, one of the key aspects of it. But if you have a very low budget, you will never really run into true scaling anyway, which means you might as well just stick to the exact match setup, and this will normally do a lot better for you. Then another important thing here is that if you have a very low budget, probably most of your budget goes towards shopping and PMAX anyway. So if you just have let's say 20, 30, 50 bucks left for your search campaigns, then it will take so long to get real good conversion data in that you might as well just stick to exact match in the first place, roll with it, and you will do much better because waiting for 30, 50, 100 conversions per month to happen, or whatever the number might be, is definitely not the best way to go about it. And then we have number 3, and that is when you are using a brand campaign or a competitor campaign. You see, there are many cases where you specifically want a certain word or term to be in there, and that is especially true for brand and competitor campaigns, right? Especially if you have a brand name that is somewhat descriptive rather than sort of a fantasy name, let's say, then you want to make sure that people use a certain constellation of words, if that makes sense. So if you have a broad name like, I don't know, the work gear shop or something like that, right? Then using that as a broad match keyword might trigger all kinds of like working gear related search queries, but you want this exact constellation of words so that you are actually triggering the actual brand intent behind it, right? And same goes for competitors. If you have a competitor campaign, which I highly recommend for most e-commerce brands in one way or another, you also want to make sure that people are naming those brands rather than just typing something in related to your industry. So if you do it that way, you make sure that there isn't any wrong intent and that you actually go for what you have been aiming for, which is the exact name basically. Now there are some final notes that I want to share about exact match, and the most important part here is that exact match isn't truly exact anymore. I'm sure that if you have been running exact match keywords before and you check the search term report, you have seen those so-called close variants. Those are basically terms that are close to your keyword in Google's eyes because of, meaning or just because of like misspellings and things like that, and they are still being triggered. And unfortunately, there is no real way around that. Now, to be fair, Google is pretty good at understanding what a very related search term is. So in a way, it makes sense to not pay attention to every single tiny letter, right? Because a misspelling or some very close variation may not completely change the meaning or the intent of the search query. But there are, of course, many cases where it does matter. So exact match isn't truly exact. But negative keywords are. So negative keywords are still ultra specific, and you can use a mix, even with exact match where you have some overlap, you can use negative keywords to fine tune even more. But of course, negative keywords are even more important in the realm of like phrase match and broad match. Now, what's also extremely important to keep in mind, and that's where many brands go wrong, is that the keyword isn't the only determining factor for the buying intent of the visitor, right? So it's not that the only way that you can decide whether someone is relevant or not is in the search query, because people tend to forget that there are a million other factors that you don't have access to, but Google has, right? The demographic of the user, the interest, the behavior, the buying patterns. Do they spend a lot of money? Do they spend very little money? Are they luxury shoppers or not? Have they purchased recently or 6 months ago? Google has all that data, and that's why basically broad match in combination with auto bidding strategies like target ROAS can be so powerful, because with manual and exact, you're only looking at the query, and with broad match and auto bidding, Google looks at all the different additional data points and all the context as well. And that's why ultimately those combinations of broad and auto bidding tend to be more effective, at least most of the time. But of course, I mentioned a whole bunch of exceptions now where exact match can make more sense for you and your business for maximum performance, profits, and revenue. Now, if you run an e-commerce brand that is doing more than $1 million per year, ideally across all channels, regardless of whether you're already using Google or not, then I highly recommend that you check the link in the description where I tell you how our Ignite framework works that we apply to e-commerce brands all over the world in all kinds of spaces, and we help them to scale to, 6 figures, multiple 6 figures, or even 7 figures per month in Google Ads revenue without only converting your own brand terms, which is probably one of the most common issues that brands have with Google Ads. So if that's interesting for you, make sure to check the link in the description. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and please subscribe for more Google Ads content for e-commerce. And with that being said, I really look forward to see you in the next video again. Bye-bye.